How's it going, ladies and bruisers? I'm Bobby Sixkilla. Welcome back to Sekimeiya. We just travelled back in time once again. Very short period of back in time, but despite our repeated attempts to break reality with a key, no dice, I guess. And if we break reality, at least we wouldn't have to deal with this place anymore. Anyway, let's see what happens next. Across the hallway was the crystal room we travelled from. We pushed the door further and peered into the empty space. We lowered our view and scanned the shining floor. With puzzled faces we stepped in to access better angles after having been unable to spot the Sekimeiya. It's not here. That didn't make any sense. Had someone taken it while we'd been in the lobby? When we travelled, it would have fallen to the floor. Couldn't have rolled somewhere? I looked all around me and shook my head. And then I continued circling the room with my eyes until I noticed an oddity. A few cabinets were composed of drawers instead of having a hollow interior compartment. One of the drawers was sticking out more than the others. I walked to it, unsure if it was anything important. When Shiroi saw what I was staring at, she also realised what was off. Upon closer examination, even though the difference was minimal, my observation was proven correct. The lowest drawer of the cabinet wasn't fully closed. Before I could reach it, Shiroi spoke about a detail I'd missed. This is the cabinet the Sekimeiya was next to, right? Oh, earlier. You're right. It was on the floor in front of it. Which meant that most likely the person who had left the Sekimeiya behind had opened the drawer. I extended my arm and pulled the drawer toward me. Immediately an object within rolled around the narrow interior, making dry noises as it hit the wall. After it stopped rolling, the immobile Sekimeiya met our eyes, letting out a surrounding faint glow. Aside from it, there was nothing else inside. Shiroi and I looked at each other, well aware of what we were seeing didn't make sense. The Sekimeiya had disappeared only to reappear inside a nearby drawer. Is it even the same one? The drawer wasn't shut all the way, so we can probably ignore the self-teleportation we've been thinking of. Someone most likely put it there. But who would have failed to properly close the drawer? Once again, it seemed as if we'd been lured into the Sekimeiya's whereabouts. Before questioning anything else, I put my shirt between my hand and the Sekimeiya's surface, as it had been trained to do. However, I couldn't last more than a couple of seconds before I had to take my hand off. What the fuck? It's burning! If we're right, it must have been here for a while. The longer the Sekimeiya spends out of the cold temperature, the hotter it gets, the further back in time we go, and the bigger the range is. If that was correct, she must have been right. I'm pretty sure it wasn't this hot during previous travels. It was an imposing claim. Every time we found the Sekimeiya, the decision of whether to touch it had been quick to arrive. If the proposition was to go substantially back through time though, I'd become highly indecisive, as it would make our presence in the tower hard to accomplish, and we would still not be able to change the past. Let's put it in the cabinet. I looked at Shiroi and was met with a bitter expression. She'd already made up her mind. Perhaps touching it would have brought us out of that tower, but it could also have considerably dragged out our stay, while we were unable to have any impact on a history that had already occurred. I nodded and began thinking about how to move it without burning myself. I think we should just stop altogether. Let's just wait until we can leave. Yeah, duh. We can travel through time, which is still ridiculous to think about. There's no point to it, right? It can only help us understand what's going on, but there are cameras all over the place, and the police might be a few hours away from entering. We don't even know how the Sekimeiya got inside the drawer, and it's clear that we don't understand anything that we've got caught up in. Touching it again could be dangerous, so there's no point in risking it again. I tactically listened to her, giving her multiple reasons not to touch it. It left me a bit confused as she hadn't been opposed to it mere minutes ago. I'm sure you can imagine that I've been thinking about how we could undo what happened, but it's not possible. The more time I spend thinking about it, the further I am from being able to let the wound heal. I don't think having some hope is bad, but it is if we know that it doesn't really exist. The Sekimeiya is useless. I was left dumbfounded by those harsh words, and I found myself trying to think about a reply before realizing that I agreed with her. I'd been going on about Isla's decided fate, while I kept trying to find a way to reverse Mia's. In reality, both were just as impossible to change. I recalled the pensive face Shiroi had been making in the lobby, where she must have reached that ultimate conclusion. We said we'd go to Iron after we'd get out to see what had become of the cabin. Let's make sure that happens. As I felt a breaking wave of emotions, I managed to give her a nod. I let the desire to escape become a background goal. While it should have been the only thing to strive for, it had been sudden, but after all those dreamlike hours, Shiroi's words had brought me back to reality. Mia's death was irreversible. I breathed deeply, trying to keep myself balanced. Alright, I agree. Let's wait patiently and ignore whatever the hell the others are doing. At 9 o'clock, the front door has to open. Right. What's going on here has nothing to do with us. And it's gotten too big to try to understand. You said Arcado and Sai could enter from the outside to grab the Sekimeiya, so let's leave it at the cabinet and wait next to it. I grabbed the bottom of my shirt with my left hand and created a little hammock there where I placed the Sekimeiya. As the cloth wasn't touching my skin, I was able to transport the Sekimeiya safely. I quickly headed toward the door, and we left the room. We were in hallway A. My perspective on the recording had been fluctuating drastically, and once again, it had become one of the worst possibilities. If it occurred, even though it had meant that Isla would be alive in the future, there was only the illusion of an upside. She ended up going to the past to die inside the room A5 cabinet. I took short steps so that the Sekimeiya would stay still. Eventually, I reached the open door that leads to the event room, where we would again attempt to wait, detaching ourselves from our surroundings. Whoa, 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 we got a choice? A choice, our first choice. Save. Ooh, ooh. Touch the Sekimeiya. No, into the room. We're going to be responsible and wait. Into the room. We're just going to wait. I've been saying this the whole time. They should just sit down and wait. Duh. So it would be foolish of me to pick anything else, right? Still cupping the Sekimeiya with my shirt, I stepped into its room, where I saw the cabinet and another open door. Shiroya came after me, glancing at the cabinet, which was partially covered by the dark curtain. She scrolled open the glass and helped me place the Sekimeiya inside. After we closed it again, we had a question to ask ourselves. Do we lock it? I think we should. We said we wouldn't use it anymore, so there's no reason not to. I nodded after thinking about it. Arcado and Sai had taken the key when they first left the bedroom. So one of the two should have still had it. If they travelled through time far enough to appear outside the tower, they would have appeared with it. So if they planned to enter once more, they should have hidden it somewhere to retrieve it easily. Nonetheless, locking it would prevent everyone else from opening it. I moved to the left side of the cabinet and crouched to manually turn the wheel. There. Only someone with the key will be able to open it. We'll stay here though, so that won't happen. She tried to move the glass and confirmed that I'd locked it properly. To achieve a better effect, she pulled down the curtain and proceeded to glance around the room, non-committally, unsure of what else to do. We haven't seen Edna or Katai since we left the bedroom. Do you want to search for them, before we decide to stay put? She didn't answer. I thought she must have been considering the whereabouts of Arcado and Sai, who we had to find as well. But a single word defied my assumption. Look. Her gaze was fixed on the floor. I traced the line, to, for a second time, spot a drop of blood in the middle of the room. We were right next to it, and hadn't seen it that easily. It was smaller than the one in the lobby, but there was a much more important distinction. This one isn't that old, it's not completely dry. Is someone walking around dripping blood? Despite what it seemed, there had to be something more to it. If what we'd seen in the lobby had only been a single drop, it must have come from a fairly serious injury. The one in front of us, though, didn't give the same impression. I looked all over the floor again and didn't even see another speck. I think we should try to find the others in case something bad has happened. I took a good look at the blood. It wasn't fully dry like the spot in the lobby, indicating that bleeding could have gone on for a while. That might have been the reason behind its smaller size. Smaller amounts of blood dry up fast. While many factors are involved, I could estimate that it would take, say, 30 minutes for a bit of it to dry fully in our conditions. The spot is close to meeting that mark, while the one in the lobby had done so before we'd seen it. How do we do it then? Does one of us stay here and make sure nobody takes the Sekimeiya? After all we'd considered, exploring the possibility of a deliberate trap to send us out wasn't that ridiculous. In truth, the 2 drops of blood didn't feel very natural. I think we should do what we've been doing up until now. One of us stays in hallway C, while the other looks through the rooms. It's unlikely anyone had an accident and bled on and off for so long. We should be careful. I wasn't opposed, so we entered hallway A. The tension had begun to grow, since we'd seen blood on the floor of the lobby, so using that arrangement felt safe enough. As we wouldn't be forced to separate ourselves while searching, moving to the mechanical room would be the only unavoidable instance of that. I'll see if I find anyone then. She nodded sharply, standing next to hallway C. Volunteering to look through some rooms was no heroic task, but I felt a bit better doing it myself. Naturally, my attention was first directed to the storeroom. I opened the door with Shiroya looking on from behind. The long corridor still extended up to the door without a handle, and I stepped in to see if I could spot any change. However, everything was identical, just as I remembered it. I had no way to know if the door had been opened from the other side, but I was certain that I still couldn't do it. In front was room A5, where gems had been stolen, although the room where Isla had been found was a more suitable name. I looked down as I entered it, knowing that I'd have to see her face again. There she was, immobile, her skin already showing a slight ashen tint. There was nothing next to her, so I quickly closed the lid and looked through the other cabinets. After I'd seen all the harmless interiors, I moved to the next room. Deeming it vacant was an easy task, which was repeated for the next 4 identical ones. Only the security room remained. After it, I go to the mechanical room, making sure nobody had entered the event room, and Shiroi would move toward hallway B. That would prevent anyone from using the event room as a bridge to remain hidden. But when I opened the door, I was met with a sudden and unexpected sight. My mind reeled as I stared at it, too stunned to react differently. I abruptly turned to face Shiroi, who responded to my gaze with a plain expression. I yelled at her to come, and she sprinted toward me. Not only had I seen something that would put an end to the search, but I also realized that Shiroi and I absolutely couldn't be separated. As soon as she peeked inside, she was visibly taken aback. Then, she had to force herself to breathe deeply and try to look again. Once she did so, she saw that she hadn't been mistaken. Katai's body was on the floor, partially under his desk. It appeared that 2 drops of blood had been a mere introduction to the sea we saw in the security room. His clothes, the desk, the floor, they'd all been splashed by the same red substance. You know what? Good. I'm fucking sick of this prick. I'm sorry, that's not nice. I can only hope that Sai is next. Anyway, even after trying to process the image for a full minute, I couldn't bring myself to move. The thick smell of blood began to disperse through the open door, trying to push us away. What is this? There's no way. At some point she let out those words that radiated her pure disbelief. I couldn't bring myself to reply, but I took a step forward, looking all over the dimly lit room. 3 bright lights were situated in front of me. They were the 3 main monitors of the computer, which indicated that less than 50 minutes ago it had been used. Shiroi entered behind me, taking careful steps to avoid the blood that covered the majority of the floor. We looked at Katai's face, under the shadow of the desk. His darkened expression looked distressed and agitated, reminiscent of the one he'd been making in the attic. I swallowed my accumulated saliva and carefully crouched to check his pulse, but I didn't feel anything. I tried not to look in Shiroi's direction and continued inspecting Katai until I saw that a bit of blood was still pouring out of his skull. I didn't have to turn his head too much to see a huge crack. I immediately averted my eyes, with no doubts about what I would have seen if his white hair hadn't prevented it. I stood up, shaken by the eerie background noise that the rhythmic sound of dripping blood and the whirring computer had joined forces to create. There's a horizontal crack in the back of his head. Given how much blood is on the desk, I think he fell on its edge. Once again, Shiroi looked down at the pool of blood. It was natural for a head injury to bleed so much. And what I deduced hadn't given much away. For all we knew, it could have been an accident. The way I imagined, if he'd fallen back, it would have hit his head against the desk, ended up under it, and pushed the chair away. Despite how much blood had coated the floor, no bloody footprints could be seen leaving the room. However, the gruesome scenery obligated us to think that someone could have done it. Pushing Katai would have achieved the same result. And anyone would love to do it, you know, because he's such a pain in the hole. Vast pools of blood would take a long time to dry, so I easily spotted smaller drops on the side. Those were much closer to drying up, reminding me of the one in the event room. No matter what had happened though, he was dead. Katai, who'd been an enigma of his own, and hadn't once stopped claiming his innocence, had met his sudden end right after freeing himself from confinement in the attic. Look at the screen, there's a message. Huh? I quickly glanced at it. As she said, in the center of the middle screen, I saw a tiny message box containing one single line of text. 10:04, cameras disabled and associated footage erased. He disabled the cameras and destroyed the footage? Oh, what? At 10:04? That must have been when Katai was here alone. We checked the time at 9:41. 20 minutes later was when we left, and he stayed behind trying to fix the system. You're right. And instead he erased the footage and shut down the cameras. That's what this is saying. The most conspicuous hint a message left on the computer was potential proof that Katai had been the culprit. We were trying to ferret out. I reached for the mouse found on the side of the desk and dragged the message aside. Beside it, the program Katai had attempted to display. The footage with was the only thing seen on the screen. It had a list of all the cameras, but they were useless after they'd actually been disabled. I lowered my gaze. The taskbar contains a single clock we had at our disposal. As soon as I glanced at it, the numbers switched from 4:59 to 5 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock. Only 4 hours are left. Let's get out of here. From this room too. The smell is getting unbearable. I had no complaints. Even though the hallway's illumination was worse, we left the much darker room and breathed steadily after the minutes we'd spent inside. The message on the screen, without a doubt, it belonged to the security system program, but was that full proof of its trustworthiness? With such an obvious message being found next to him? I had to ask myself if it was legitimate or a diversion left by the culprit. Not only had the scene left the possibility of an accident open, it also displayed an incriminating message next to Katai. Had the message been a fabrication from the real culprit to put the blame on Katai and play it off as an accident, while they'd been the ones to deal with the cameras and security system? It wasn't easy to tell, and I wasn't sure which idea I was more inclined to lead toward. Wait, no, that doesn't make any sense, look! I followed Shiroya's line of sight again, that time up to the ceiling. That green light is supposed to indicate that the camera's recording, right? There's no way they were disabled so long ago. I'd forgotten about that, you're right. However, it was Katai who told us what the green light meant. We can't be certain about it. They haven't stopped flickering, so I'm sure they also were before 10 o'clock. So if the cameras really aren't recording, the lights must simply indicate that they're powered on. It's strange though, that Katai would tell such a lie. If he disabled the cameras, part of the reason must have been that he didn't want the police to see them when they entered. Despite that, he's incriminating himself by lying to us about what the lights mean. Yeah, that's not consistent. Could someone else have left the message to blame him? Not sure, but thinking about it more, there's no way this was an accident. If Katai fell backward and hit his head against the desk, he must have been exiting the room. Why would he try and leave with that incriminating message being shown on the screen? Another person must have been involved somehow. I mean, yeah. Shiroya agreed with me. After a few pensive seconds, being presented once again with the fact that a murderer was nearby, we had to decide on what to do. Do you want to search for the others? We should. We don't know what happened to Akira or Sai, but I'm worried about Erina. We can't split up, Atsuki. We have to stay together no matter what. I couldn't say that it was unlikely that Erina would become a target for the culprit. Katai was employed by Ashiya, a member of the security staff, but Isla had died despite being a complete outsider and a child. Any one of us could have been next. Yeah, okay, let's stick together and find Erina. Let's just be extremely careful. We have nothing to defend ourselves with if we're suddenly attacked. She gave me a tense, saddened look. Here's a keyboard. You're in the computer room. Keyboards are good weapons. Even though only 4 hours remained, seeing the outside world felt much further away. Let's see if the Sekimeiya is still there. We entered the event room. The Sekimeiya hadn't been taken while our attention had been grabbed by the security room, so it was unlikely that it would be the intent of the culprit's plan. As a routine effort, I lowered the curtain again. We have to find Erina. It's not good that we haven't seen her yet. Alright, there's no need to separate it at all. We're only trying to find her, and she wouldn't hide from us. It could be dangerous to try and corner the culprit. Right, let's finish up this floor. Oh, we're back to searching again. We went to the lobby to access the mechanical room. Down the staircase was the strangely imposing room that might have served purposes beyond our understanding. There were some spots out of reach from the stairs, under a table or behind some chairs in the back. Stepping further in revealed the lack of any hidden person. I doubt Erina would be in hallway B room, but let's look before going up. The first room we looked into was empty. Not having stumbled upon anyone hadn't stopped getting more and more unsettling. We knew that someone must have travelled with the Sekimeiya shortly before we had. I'd explored the thought that perhaps if the range had been huge, Erina could have been caught up in it and left the tower. However, Katai, who had gone downstairs before her, should have travelled as well. Since the dryness of his blood indicated that he died almost half an hour before we found him, I was willing to disregard that theory. Shiroya and I proceeded to the next room. Of course, if they travelled out of the tower after leaving the attic, it was possible Katai had re-entered the tower through the storeroom entrance and then died. If the search for Erina yielded no results, that thought would gain some traction. The next room underwent an identical search. Halfway through, we realised that searching inside the cabinets defied the point of what we'd agreed on. They were only a potential hiding spot for a culprit we decided was out of reach. We opened the door to room B4. Past it on the floor, Naomi's corpse reminded us that this was the room where we found her. The sight stopped us in place, leaving us dumbstruck. because at her right, Edina lay, her clothes tinted maroon by all the blood on them. Shiraya looked at me with a clear wish to deny reality. It hit us like a truck. Edina was dead too. The only culprits we wanted to avoid remained with us. I'm guessing that the choice I made, when we made a choice, is going to kill us. We're going to die. The choice I made is getting everybody killed. So we're obviously going to have to go back there and fix that, but I guess we'll finish this up. I got before I took short steps forward. She was laying sideways, which let us see all the blood on her chest, though not extensively on the floor. There was some in her stomach and legs too, but unlike Katai's, her expression looked almost serene, despite how the time inside the tower had been for her. When I turned around, I saw Shiraya kneeling down, burying her face in her hands. Someone around us had killed a mother who just lost her daughter, and we would have to continue fearing that looming danger for 4 more hours. I had no words for the tragic view I was forced to accept. We stared at the scene in silence. Edina's clothes were a little torn, signalling a physical fight, and the colour of the blood indicated that, like Katai's, it had been drying up for almost enough time to no longer be considered a liquid. That's it, I can't look at her. Let's go. I lowered my head even more than it already was, clenching my fists. Seeing Shiraya like that was heartbreaking, but it was ultimately impressive how strong she'd been. On my end, I'd only found myself rejecting reality, never fully letting the deaths we'd seen really sink in. I stepped out of the room, but I couldn't avoid turning around again and witnessing the end of 2 women we'd met that day. Give me a second. Naomi's body was covered by an elegant curtain, so I didn't want to leave Edina behind without one. The cameras might not have been recording, so I went ahead and detached another curtain from the cabinet, laying it over Edina. With that small attempt at dignity, we left the room. We walked to the event room with lost expressions. A threatening atmosphere had reared its ugly head, with more finality than before. 2 murders had recently been committed, and perhaps, while we'd also been on the crystal floor, given the state of Edina's blood, it was more than likely that her body had been in that room for a while. We'd reacted strongly to the past 2 or 3 deaths. It wasn't that we were desensitized, but our feelings seemed insignificant compared to what was going on in that place. As if our defeat had been unavoidable from the start, there had been no time to really stop and consider the true gravity of being sealed away with 1 or more murderers. At least not for me. Thinking of ways to either avoid or root out danger had been more important. But things had changed, Shiraya and I being the only ones left hammered in just how deadly the situation was. With all colour drained from the world, we simply moved forth, feeling like birds with clipped wings trapped in a cage. I made sure the Sekimeiya was still inside the cabinet and sat next to the hallway A door. Then, Shiraya leaned against the wall in front of me. More than likely, we were no match for the culprit behind those deaths. There was no point in trying to do anything. We had nowhere to possibly hide. Wishing for a calm stay, we quietly let time carry us. With nothing left to do, I meaninglessly ran through the possibilities of trusting one of the others. There was one detail that felt off. Doubting Arkato and Sai for the culprits was foolish, but one thing backed it up. It was the drop of blood we found in the lobby. It had been completely dry, meaning that it must have been left while we'd been locked in the attic. However, the blood around Katai and Edina's bodies had been, naturally, from a time after we'd unlocked the bedroom. That meant that during the time Arkato and Sai should have been the only people outside the attic's bedroom, someone had lost blood. In addition, I thought that a small injury wouldn't have produced a single drop as big as that one. It could have been an accident. Arkato and Sai could have fought, resulting in Arkato's victory, going off the lack of injuries when he joined us again. However, the truth could have been slightly more convoluted. Perhaps Katai and Edina had travelled to the past after leaving the attic, then they'd been attacked in the lobby, and later, the culprit had finished them off. No matter what had happened, it was clear that something had occurred while we'd been at the top of the tower. And no matter who was left nearby, we didn't want to cross paths with them anymore. Nonetheless, we were guarding the Sekimeiya. We hadn't discussed it again, but it was what we'd intended to do before seeing the last 2 dead bodies. If the culprit showed themselves to obtain it, in the case that we had to escape, we had a door on both sides of the room we'd left open. I closed my eyes and left my mind blank. It felt nice, after having gone over so many thoughts. As soon as I did so, different questions came to me. Instead of how, why? Why had someone killed Edina? What could anyone have gained with that? Had it been out of pure malice? Having taken advantage of the disabled cameras? That didn't feel right. We all would have been killed by that point, but the Sekimeiya around actions were bound to have more depth than they appeared to. With such a shallow motive, and such a shallow motive wouldn't have been portrayed by someone who constantly managed to remain undiscovered. I wanted to think. I couldn't be sure with Katai, but Edina hadn't done anything to warrant her death. Perhaps I thought she'd found the culprit. And I went back to my little theory I'd put together. If she travelled to the past and confronted Arcado and Sai, while the rest of us had been in the bedroom, that could have given them a motive for her death. Even though they were only potential culprits, they hadn't appeared yet, so it was appropriate to think they might not have intended to do so again. Wait, the recording! According to Arcado and Sai, Edina was alive. Atsuki, what are you thinking about? Do you have any more ideas? And hey, Edina, what's with that face? Isla, what's gotten into you? What are you holding? And Edina, why aren't you doing anything? Even though the scenario played out as if Edina and I were present, that isn't possible anymore. Who did that recording truly intend to trick? It couldn't be a coincidence that Arcado and Sai were the only people still alive and the only ones to have been mentioned in the recording. However, Edina's death nullified its chances of being real. Or did it? I tried to think about it. Even though Isla's already dead, she was the third and last person to appear in the recording, yet her death wasn't enough to completely deny its veracity. And that's solely thanks to the Sekimeiya's existence. It's possible that Isla is still alive. She'll be part of the recording in the future, and we'll travel to the past and end up in the cabinet where we found her corpse. There might be different arrangements, but the gist would always be the same. Could something similar apply to Edina? Although in her case nothing supports it, the exact same thing could be going on with her, couldn't it? So, not even her dead body is enough to disregard the recording, not while the Sekimeiya exists. Despite my uncomfortable position, my sight began to fade, and I started to feel drowsy. Oh, we're dead. Every time I rested a little, my body reminded me of how tired I was, and of its strong demand for a full sleep. I saw that Shiroya's eyes were shut. I wanted to resist it, but I couldn't help but close mine too. Lay my head on my shoulder, put my body against the wall. Yeah, man, nothing like a good sleep, out in the open, in a place with a murderer who's going on a killing spree. I knew that my consciousness was soon to fade, but having to wait for almost another 4 hours made any attempt at preventing it futile. I let myself go, temporarily abandoning the nightmarish tower engulfed in mystery. Are we dead? We're dead, right? My subconscious was alert at all times, aware that I was surrounded by ever-present danger. That was why as soon as the faintest sound met my ears, my senses came back. Oh no, it's Shiroya. There's two of them. As if I travelled through time, I opened my eyes, unaware of how long I'd been there for. Thanks to the open doors, I discerned the origin of the noise. I stared ahead where Hallway B was. What? I froze. The dry sound of my heart echoed within me and stuttered. Just behind the door was Shiroya. As soon as she looked inside the event room, she saw my piercing gaze and received it with her own. After an eternity of a second, she turned around and sped up, her figure rapidly disappearing. Then without moving, I looked at Shiroya. She was still sitting down and leaning against the wall before my very eyes, resting her head on her arms. Hey, are you awake? Shiroya. Huh? She lifted her face and looked at me with nearly closed eyes. Were you sleeping? Oh, sorry, yeah. I stood up clueless, my mind cluttered. No, it might sound ridiculous, but I just saw you. I dashed to hallway B. It was empty. My mind still reeling, I entered the event room. What? I'm being serious. Footsteps woke me and I saw you in hallway B. You saw me too, but you walked toward hallway C. And there's no one here. What? How long have I been asleep? I don't know. It reminded me of such a sight could have only been achieved with the Sekimeiya, so I uncovered the curtain. The Sekimeiya is still here and it's locked. I don't understand. Are you sure it was me? Yes, but there was a big difference. You were wearing different clothes. Different clothes? Were they mine? No, but I think I recognized them. You had your coat, but you were wearing a different shirt and pants. I think I saw them earlier in a wardrobe at the attic. She was too lost to respond, and understandably so. It meant that in the future she was guaranteed to travel from the past and live what I'd experienced. But it all went far beyond my comprehension, especially her strange behaviour and clothing. Stay here for a second. I rushed out of the room and ran to hallway C. It was empty as well. Had it been a hallucination? There was no way. I was sure of what I'd seen. I circled the floor and entered the event room from hallway A. It appeared that Shiroya I'd seen had deliberately hidden herself, so I wasn't sure if searching in depth was a good idea. Let's go to the attic and see if I'm right about this. She gave me another confused look and approached me with her hand on her forehead. We wanted to spend the remainder of our time in the event room, but leaving it felt justified as Shiroya's bizarre apparition indicated that something else was going on, or about to happen. Should we check the time first? Oh, probably. Hallway A was still completely vacant. Shiroya had clearly seen me, and had chosen to walk away. It made no sense. If that had been a future version of her, she must have known that I'd see her. It was Sai's dilemma all over again. I had just explained the events to Shiroya, so if she ever were to travel to the past and repeat them, she'd only be finishing off a loop without an origin. It couldn't be that she purposely let me see her because she'd been told it had happened. If Shiroya ever travelled again, she'd immediately recognise that what I just experienced could be about to occur, so there was no chance it would happen without her knowledge. Like when she called the elevator in the attic. The state of the security room hadn't changed. I saw some drops of blood had fully dried up, which was consistent with the time displayed on the computer. 5:29. Shiroya, are you there? It was such a nonsensical sight. The person I was calling for was right next to me, but she wasn't who my shouts were directed to. Once again, if I tried to continue reasoning with my assumption that everything had to have an origin of some kind, the most simple explanation behind what had happened was that Shiroya would eventually lose her memories. I was getting a headache. I wanted to fully stop all those crazy thoughts, but I couldn't. Not after the way that Shiroya in the hallway had stared right through me. The elevator is still here, so if you went up, you probably didn't use it. Let's walk. She simply nodded. I understood that since she hadn't personally seen herself, she must have been too lost to take it seriously, and she was still sleepy. As I went up, I reassured myself of what I believed. Something else has to be happening. The way we think the Sekimeiya works does not explain this. Both of us wanted to stay in the event room until 9 o'clock, but it was a different Shiroya who'd made us leave. What if whatever's about to happen leads to Shiroya travelling, and she experiences her part of what I just lived? That doesn't make a single bit of sense. Again, the reason why we left the room would be because we left the room, and then made ourselves leave the room. There's something clearly missing. Not only is this a bootstrap paradox, but it also goes against our own interests. We have every intention of staying there, so what could be the meaning behind what I just saw actually be? I hoped that whatever the attic contained, it would be a hint of that answer. Shiroya had been dressed in clothes that I thought I'd seen up there, which amplified how unlikely that bootstrap was to occur. Why'd she be dressed in clothes from the attic, instead of going over how unlikely causal loops, I keep doing that. I had to shift my approach. The answer had to be something that wouldn't directly come from me, having seen her wearing the clothes. However, that had already happened, and I told her about it, so what remained possible? What could the master's answer be? Reason? That was what I needed to locate. Alright, we need to wrap this one up here. Well, shit just escalated. I'm not sure if are we on the track to the bad end after that decision I made? I'm going to save in a different spot, just in case. Because I feel like we might be on the track to a bad end, but we might not be. This might be the way it's meant to go, but it just seemed really abrupt to lose two people like that, Editor and Katai, in such a short and quickly glazed over sort of fashion, you know what I mean? Well, we got to make a big deal out of both of Naomi's deaths and Isla's. We could have just moved past these ones. I know they're like, oh, we're not desensitized, and you get desensitized, I'm sure. Like, eventually we get used to it, I suppose. But even so, like, as the reader, it's not as easy to get desensitized, I don't think. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.